I am going to talk about my own experience with the true self and false self. I've recently been studying Donald Winnicott, who came up with this idea that we had a false self, that we go out into the world with the false self and interact with society because of not being able to interact with society with our true selves. Winnicott believed that we had all these urges within us, that if we'd have got rid of them with very open parents who let us be angry, who let us rebel, who let us speak our minds, then we would have those needs met and they would be calmed in us, and we would be able to go out into the world and then have this very compliant or somehow trained and also aligned with society's rules and acceptable behaviours in society. We can't do what we want in society. We have to go by these accepted rules that make it a better living space for all of us. And there are, of course, our behaviours that we are expected to follow. With my own experience of the true self and false self, I was an adopted child. And when you're an adopted child, you often have a really strong false self from when you were a child, because the parents are expecting children like them. Usually, obviously there are exceptions, but it's my experience and observing other people's experience that this is something that is common, where people adopting are wanting their own children, and to have an adopted child is a sticking plaster on that. And I went through that, and it was very difficult being placed with people that were very basic. They didn't value education, and they wanted children like themselves. So I showed aptitude. I was a bright child, and they saw that as something weird, something odd. So they led me to have to cover up my intelligence, to act dumb, to dumb myself down, to be very submissive and compliant. And of course, when you create a false self, this false self can become so thick and so realized by yourself as being a part of you, that you yourself accept it as your real self, and it becomes something that's glued on and you can't pull it off. And a lot of people, even those non-adoptive, go through life suffering from not being able to be their real selves with other people. And not having a real self creates lots of difficulties. Obviously, if you're not in touch with your real self, then you're not connected to your core. You don't have a life path that is very fulfilling to yourself. You perhaps go into the wrong career, a career that your false self might enjoy. You perhaps pick a partner that your false self needs to, to face the world. I had a very compliant false self, so I would choose men that were very actively rebellious to try and compensate for the fact I was so submissive and couldn't act on my own innate true self rebelliousness. That came from my Irish bloodline, that, mostly we're a nation of rebellious people, but I couldn't reach that. So I had a compliant self. So I went for men like this, but obviously at the end of the day, you don't want something outside of yourself. You want to connect with what is inside. I always felt that I was missing something. I tried to get counselling around it. I went to see shrinks about it and was constantly told, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. But I knew deep inside that there was something wrong. And what was wrong was I was living in the false self. People that don't know you could interact with you and say, but there's nothing wrong with you. But you know that what you're presenting is unreal. I have a strong instinct for what is a real persona and what is an unreal persona, having lived with an unreal persona for many, many years. I noticed that in certain circumstances, my true self would come through, going through life. And I noticed when I was at work, if I had somebody with high authority, high dominance, with charisma, who liked me, my true self would come out in my work, which was highly, which had a strong sense of investigations. And of course, but when they weren't there and triggering that in me, I was left back with my plastic full self, which was a very hard experience. It's a very hard experience to go through life just from your full self. For some people, it works quite well for them because their full self is a narcissistic self, and therefore they go through life believing they're better than they are. And I've always said to myself, it must be fun to have a narcissistic full self, because of course you glide through life. They seem to glide through life. However, I do believe narcissists do not have that much of an enjoyable time, because they, again, are in touch with this, very important true self, which of course is connected up to our soul, connected up to spirit, to God. And only in the true self can we self-actualize and have a fulfilling life. So my mother was a narcissist. She had such a high opinion of herself that I get very triggered around people that are narcissists, especially female narcissists. I go straight hard into my full self and literally hide out there because she was violent towards me, very verbally aggressive, constantly. There was no escape from her. And it was a case of put me down and she was raised up. So I had to dumb myself down. So when I'm in the presence of women that I sense there's any narcissism, I immediately go to dumb down persona, and are happy that they might think that I'm stupid because it means I'm not going to get a punch in the face. So this is how the full self can continue on in life. My mother's long dead. It's not legal for people to punch you or hit you, but I still have that fear and still feel I need the full self. If I'd have come across therapists or counsellors or shrinks that knew about Winnicott, perhaps I would have been helped, but I wasn't helped until the current day. Now I'm doing a counselling course and got myself a proper bona fide counsellor who knows about this kind of thing, who knows about the full selves, and who believes that we are different selves at any one given point in time, who uses internal family systems to converse with these different aspects of ourselves. And I found it very interesting that I still couldn't access my real self, even though I knew that it was there. I'd seen glimpses of it through my life. And it was only through recent therapy, and I was abused by an ex-peer of mine. Recently, he'd written something about me in a blog that very much upset me, and it triggered a massive depression. And I went to my counsellor therapist, and using that, we went into the body. We felt where the pain was, and we felt where the pain was, and we realized that that was a part, and we conversed with the part, and that part led us to a buried part that is called an exile. And then when we reached the exile, we realized that it was a buried part, buried by a protector part, and it was the exile, and the exile was my true self. And then you work with the true self that might well be a child at this point, and then you bring it out and get it stronger and stronger and bring it up. I feel, since I've been doing the therapy, I feel so much better. I have this strong sense of myself inside myself. Yes, I'm sure if, I'm triggered in some kind of way by somebody that reminds me of the people that made me form this full self, that up it comes like a shutter. But now awareness is the key. I'm aware that it's a shutter that comes up and down. I'm aware right now I'm going into a full self. Now I'm not being real with this individual. And I try and bring myself back to a state of reality, a state of operating from the true self, because the more you do it, the more you catch yourself being a full self, the more you can say, right, this is wrong. Why are you doing it? You're feeling fear, but you're actually very safe. You're not going to be hurt. Nothing's going to happen. Lift the shutter up and just let your true self show. There's no point in going through life only having your true self when you're at home all by yourself. I lived like that for many, many years, and I thought it was okay. But then my life started to resemble the life of my full self. Of course, my full self was very submissive. My full self didn't know how to solve investigations like my true self did. And when I lost my career, I literally crumbled because I had nothing to go back on. My true self went into withdrawal, and I just had my full self. My full self was highly submissive. It didn't go out in the world as a lion. It went out in the world as a mouse. So my outer reality started to resemble the life of a mouse. I became very depressed. I didn't know what was going on. Counsellors, therapists, again, didn't know what was going on. They merely said to me, you don't have to have a personality disintegration just because you've lost your career on Fleet Street. But the fact is, I did, and I didn't know how to get back to feeling okay. Now I'm back to feeling okay, and it's only because of the therapy. It's ironically because this man attacked me and pushed me into such an awful depression, because I thought he was a friend. I thought he was a decent person, he had a lot of integrity, and I was wrong. And I got a slap, and it was only in this slap, pushing me into the depression, that my therapist found where it was in my body, which was a little bit of Eugene Glendling feeling in the body, which led me to be able to find the buried true self. So it is something that needs to be dug. If you're in your full self, it's an important thing to do, to dig to find the true self, because you'll find yourself at a later age having lived a life that isn't yours. Now, if you're in a narcissistic full self, you'll probably have a grand life with a big house and nice looking partner and feel everything's hunky-dory, but you will have that sense of emptiness, like this doesn't seem real, this doesn't seem like it's really me. So while a narcissistic full self might work for you rather than a submissive self doesn't work very well, you end up pretty much on the bottom rungs of life. They both lead to a sense of emptiness, a sense of not having a life, a sense of being like the book written by James Masterson, The Search for the Missing Self. A lot of people came to his practice saying they didn't know who they were, they didn't know where they were going, they felt like they weren't themselves. And this goes back to Donald Winnicott's Full Self, True Self. So it was a really very important thing that he discovered. I was very glad. I was asked by my counselling class to talk about Winnicott finding out that he discovered this. Made me feel very excited because it's something that really, really affected me so much. I would say that my entire life was a lifelong search for my true self. And I feel very passionately that adoptees suffer from this really strongly. I'd interviewed 2 serial killers in my life, 2 famous serial killers, and they what they'd carried out again was to do with full self, real self, true self, real self. The buried, angry child. I found when I interviewed them that it was a child that had carried out these killings. Certainly, looking at the Hillside Strangler, Kenneth Bianchi, whom I interviewed in America for my book, In for the Kill. I was commissioned by The Guardian to go out there. Ironically, it was the journalist that upset me who helped me arrange this. And I interviewed him, and I was looking for the killer. I was looking for the part that carried out these awful crimes, killing 13 women. And it was only when he went in child mode and he was talking about colouring in with crayons that suddenly I felt the horror of all his crimes seep through my body. And I thought, that's it, that's the killer. I'm sitting here looking into the eyes of a serial killer right now. And he was a boy. So it's very interesting. It has a lot of connotations, full self, true self. And I'm going to delve into it even more, perhaps write some things about it. And I'm very grateful to have a really brilliant counselling class, brilliant counselling teachers that have educated me in this way. And I feel like I'm growing and learning. And what more food does the true self need to come out and play but to be nourished with an education? Thank you for listening.